Thank you all so much. It's about embracing our true selves, because authenticity is the foundation of all.
There are messages you can't unsee. Some come with hearts and laughter, others tear the floor out from under your life. Mine arrived at 11:47 p.m., wrapped in a cloud of confetti emojis and stupidity. I was still in my suit from the rehearsal dinner, tie loosened, the taste of cheap champagne turning flat in my mouth. The hotel room was quiet, except for the muffled hum of the air conditioner and the glow of my fiancée's phone lighting up the nightstand beside her. Brooke was asleep, or pretending to be. Her breathing came steady and shallow, like someone who has practiced the art of looking peaceful. She always did that, performed calmness even in chaos. We'd spent the evening surrounded by smiling people and fake promises. Her friends, mostly influencers and travel vloggers, filmed everything: the toast, the dinner, the laughter. I'd smiled for the cameras, the loyal groom-to-be, while she'd checked her phone every few minutes like the device might short-circuit without her touch. I'd noticed it for months, her constant messages, the half-smiles she thought I couldn't see. When I asked, she'd brush me off with, "Just the girls planning the bachelorette. Relax." Relax, her favorite word, the universal dismissal. A month before the wedding, she'd gone on a brand retreat in Los Angeles. A long weekend filled with poolside photos and networking. I'd wanted to go with her, but she said it was strictly for content creators, and, "You wouldn't like it, Adam. It's not your thing." I'd pretended not to mind, but something in her tone had rubbed against me like sandpaper. A week later, she came home with a tan and a new perfume that didn't smell like her usual floral sweetness. It was sharper, musky, foreign. I'd told myself she was just experimenting, the way she did with hashtags and photo filters. But that night, lying there with her phone buzzing every few minutes, the scent filled the room again, faint but unmistakable. I remember thinking, perfume shouldn't make you feel anxious. When the notification popped up on my own phone, it took a few seconds for my brain to process it. A group message, Brooke's Bachelorette Squad. I didn't remember joining that group. Then I saw the first message, a string of laughing emojis, followed by one from Brooke herself. "Relax. I'll sneak off with my ex before the honeymoon." There it was, 12 words, 3 years, and one future erased in a single line. I read it again, then again. My eyes traced every pixel, every careless syllable. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she meant something else. My mind scrambled for an explanation, because that's what people do when their world starts cracking. They try to patch it with reason. Another message came seconds later from one of her bridesmaids. "Girl, you're savage. Just make sure he doesn't find out before tomorrow." And Brooke replied with a laughing emoji and a champagne glass. The room suddenly felt colder, but not in any poetic way, just still, like air in a museum. I could hear the soft rustle of her breathing, her phone glowing beside her face. I wanted to wake her, to demand an explanation, to say something sharp enough to hurt. But I didn't move. People think rage is loud. It isn't. It's precise. It's an architect with a ruler, measuring the exact distance between what was promised and what was delivered. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a taxi honked, and the sound carried up through the thin hotel walls. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I was past all that. I picked up my own phone, opened my laptop, and began the slow dismantling of a life. First, I logged into the venue's portal, canceled the payment. The floral company, the caterer, the photographer, click, click, click. Done. Each confirmation email felt like a hammer stroke against something fragile. Then I deleted every social account I had. Years of architecture photos, travel memories, random snapshots of Brooke pretending not to pose. Gone. At 2:30 a.m., I booked a one-way flight out of the country. Anywhere. I didn't care where. I chose Lisbon because it was the first destination that didn't remind me of her. At 3, I drafted a message to the hotel coordinator. The groom won't be attending. Please forward this to anyone who needs to know. Attached, a screenshot of the group chat. Fax. No emotion. By 4 hours, my suitcase was packed. The city outside was just waking up, streetlights dimming, a garbage truck humming somewhere below. I stood by the window for a moment, looking down at the glow of the parking lot. Somewhere out there, the caterer was probably prepping for the biggest day of their career. Somewhere, Brooke's friends were still asleep, dreaming of flower crowns and champagne brunches. And there I was, the ghost groom. I didn't leave a note. She'd find out soon enough. When I stepped into the hallway, my reflection flashed in the elevator mirror. Tie crooked, eyes hollow, mouth set in a straight line. I looked like someone who'd been edited out of his own story. Downstairs, the night clerk gave me a polite smile. "Early start, Mr. Miller." "Something like that," I said. Outside, the dawn sky was a bruised shade of purple. I loaded my suitcase into the rental car, started the engine, and drove. The city blurred behind me. By the time I reached the airport, the sun had begun to rise, washing everything in pale gold. I parked, turned off my phone, and sat for a few minutes, just breathing. I thought about the first time Brooke and I met, 3 years earlier, at a design expo in Chicago. She'd approached my booth, pretending to care about sustainable architecture, while actually filming a vlog about minimalist aesthetics. She was loud, confident, alive in a way that drew people in. I wasn't like her, steady, deliberate, the guy who found comfort in blueprints and straight lines. Somehow that balance had worked, until it didn't. I'd once told her that love felt like building something together. She'd laughed and said, "Then I guess I'm the color, and you're the structure." Maybe she was right. The problem was, she kept repainting things until the frame cracked. When the plane lifted off, I looked out the window, the clouds folding beneath me like paper. I didn't feel free. Freedom implies choice. This was more like evacuation. Somewhere over the ocean, I started to laugh. The woman in the next seat looked over, startled. "Sorry," I said, "just remembering my wedding day." She gave an awkward smile, not sure whether to comfort or avoid me. I didn't blame her. There's no etiquette for sitting next to a man who's ghosted his own ceremony. When I landed in Lisbon, the air smelled different. Salt and stone, like the world had been scrubbed clean. I checked into a small hotel near the waterfront, the kind that didn't ask questions if you paid in cash. The clerk handed me a key attached to a heavy brass tag. "Vacation?" she asked. "Something like that," I said again. It was becoming my default answer for everything. I spent the first day walking, narrow streets, tiled walls, cafe windows filled with pastries. I kept waiting for the guilt to catch up, but it never did. Only the quiet. By nightfall, my phone had filled with missed calls and messages, 47 in total. Her number appeared again and again, followed by her mother's, followed by unknown ones that were probably guests or journalists or both. Then came one message, short and raw. "Adam, please, just talk to me. We can fix this," I almost replied. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. But what could I say? Sure, let's just pretend betrayal is a clerical error. Instead, I forwarded the group chat screenshots to the venue coordinator one last time. People deserved to know who had actually ruined the wedding. Then I turned the phone off for good. The next morning, the story hit the internet. Runaway groom exposes influencer bride's betrayal. The headline felt surreal. I hadn't told a soul, but screenshots have a life of their own. Maybe someone at the venue leaked them. Maybe one of her so-called friends. Either way, Brooke's picture was everywhere. Her smiling face next to headlines about humiliation and scandal. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still, like the air after thunder. In a small cafe near the harbor, I sipped espresso and listened to the locals talk about soccer. Nobody there knew me. Nobody cared. I liked that. But as I watched the headlines multiply, something darker crept in. Not rage exactly, but clarity. She would spin it. She always did. She'd craft her own version, post a video, cry on camera, claim heartbreak, victimhood, redemption. That was her gift, turning her chaos into content. I'd left quietly. She'd never do the same. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed to violet, I sat on the balcony of my tiny hotel room, watching waves slap the seawall. Somewhere in the distance, a street performer played an accordion. The melody was offbeat, imperfect, human. I realized I hadn't cried, not once. I didn't feel broken. I felt redesigned, like someone had taken a hammer to a wall I hadn't realized was rotting and exposed the truth beneath. Still, part of me kept replaying the details, her laughter at dinner, the perfume from Los Angeles, the way she'd said, "It's just the girls planning something funny." Every memory now came with an asterisk. The world wasn't ending. It was simply rearranging itself. Before I went to bed, I opened my notebook, the one I used for sketches, and drew a single line across the page. Straight, clean, final. Then I wrote, "The groom won't be attending." I slept for the first time in days. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. Downstairs, a waiter greeted me with a polite, "Bom dia." I nodded, ordered coffee, and watched people pass by outside. Tourists with cameras, kids chasing pigeons, an old man reading a newspaper. Normal life. The kind that doesn't require hashtags. When I finished my drink, I left a generous tip and walked to the pier. The air tasted like salt and diesel. A ship horn sounded in the distance. I thought about everything that had led here, the texts, the betrayal, the calm precision with which I'd disappeared. It all felt distant, like a movie I'd watched too many times. Then, as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Adam Miller?" The voice was male, formal. "Yes." "This is Thomas Grady from Modern Living Weekly. We'd like a comment about the story circulating online." I laughed quietly. No comment. "Mr. Miller, your side of the story could really—" "No comment," I repeated, and hung up. The phone buzzed again immediately. I powered it off, slipped it into my pocket, and stood for a long time at the edge of the pier, watching sunlight break across the water. People say betrayal changes you. It doesn't. It reveals you. And what it revealed in me was something I hadn't known was there. An architect's patience applied to something far less noble. I turned away from the sea, the wind tugging at my jacket, and started walking back toward the city. I didn't know what I'd build next, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it wouldn't collapse. Lisbon had a way of pretending not to notice you. That's what I liked about it. A city that minded its own business. Nobody cared who you were yesterday or what you'd left behind. They just wanted you to pay for your coffee and move aside so they could get to the sugar packets. I rented a small apartment above a cobbler's shop in Alfama, a maze of alleys so narrow even Google Maps gave up halfway through. The stairs creaked like they'd been waiting a century for conversation. The walls were cracked but honest, which was more than I could say for most people I knew. From my window, I could see the river slipping past rooftops like melted glass. The city smelled of espresso, diesel, and ocean salt. At night, the trams squealed through the hills like restless ghosts. I'd lie awake, listening, half expecting the sound to turn into her laugh. But silence is addictive. After a while, I stopped waiting for her voice to fill it. I kept a routine. Wake early, buy bread from the same bakery, work at the drafting table I'd assembled out of an old door. The landlord, Senor Luis, assumed I was a writer because he caught me staring at paper for hours. I didn't correct him. Architect felt like a name from another life. Still, I sketched. Not buildings this time, systems, processes, the mathematics of downfall. I told myself it was therapy, not plotting, but therapy doesn't usually involve flowcharts labeled with other people's names. The news of Brooke's humiliation kept finding me even when I tried to avoid it. You can't outrun the internet. It sticks to your shoes. At first, she'd gone quiet, retreating into the PR bunker. Then, inevitably, she returned. A video popped up one morning in my feed, her face framed by perfect lighting, eyes glassy but defiant. "Sometimes life doesn't go as planned," she said, "but every storm teaches us something." Storm. The word irritated me. She talked about emotional weather while ignoring the debris she'd left behind. The comments section was split between sympathy and schadenfreude. Half the viewers called her brave, the other half called her a fraud. I read them all while pretending not to care. A week later, she posted photos from a new collaboration, some luxury wellness retreat in Bali. The caption read, "Healing is the new hustle." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Brooke never missed a marketing opportunity, not even while standing on her own wreckage. That's when something shifted. Up until then, I'd been satisfied with leaving. Escape had felt like revenge enough. But watching her rebuild the stage, watching her audience applaud the performance, it made my skin crawl. She hadn't learned anything. She'd just rebranded her guilt. I realized I didn't want her to disappear. I wanted her exposed. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with observation. So I began collecting data. Every public post, every partnership, every name tagged in her photos, I archived them. She used the same photographer, the same PR manager, the same predictable circle of people who depended on her glitter. Her life was an open concept floor plan with no walls. All I had to do was study the layout. Her new manager was a man named Tyler Grant, early 30s, a face built for magazine covers, a smile that looked like it came with terms and conditions. I recognized him from an old post, her brand retreat in Los Angeles. The same trip she'd told me was all work, so that was him, the ex she'd promised to sneak off with. Something in me went quiet when I realized, the kind of quiet that doesn't break easily. Tyler Grant ran a boutique PR firm that specialized in reputation management. The irony was almost artistic. His clients were minor celebrities who'd said the wrong thing on the internet and needed image CPR. Brooke was now one of them. Their photos together multiplied: business dinners, charity galas, weekend strategy sessions. She smiled beside him like the past had been conveniently edited out. I couldn't tell if he knew the full story or just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. He was now part of the structure, and structures can be tested. One afternoon, while sketching the floor plan of my apartment, I caught myself drawing a second outline beneath it, the metaphorical blueprint of her world. Circles for allies, squares for sponsors, dotted lines for secrets. A professional habit turned into anatomy of payback. Elliot used to tell me architecture was about control. You plan, you measure, you anticipate failure so it never happens. I'd failed once because I trusted someone else to maintain the structure. I wouldn't repeat that mistake. Step 1 was understanding the foundation. Brooke's world revolved around perception. She didn't need wealth or affection as long as people believed she had both. Strip away the illusion, and the whole design collapses. Step 2. Patience. The impatient man is easy to catch. The patient man is invisible. So I stayed still, pretending to move on. I took freelance work, small drafting jobs for renovation firms. My new boss, Elliot Carter, was a retired architect who'd moved to Portugal to escape bureaucracy. He was precise, sarcastic, and allergic to small talk. We got along perfectly. He'd find me staring at the screen sometimes and say, "Don't overthink the lines, Miller. Buildings don't betray you, people do." "Noted," I'd say, smiling without looking up. The job gave me structure. The rest of my time I filled with reconnaissance. I subscribed to her newsletter under a fake name. Read her posts about mindfulness, resilience, and curating peace. The irony could have powered the entire electrical grid. Every story she told the world was a draft of herself. Edited, retouched, optimized. The real Brooke was buried under filters and lighting presets. But illusions cast shadows, and I'd learned to read shadows better than most. A month passed before I found my first crack. Her Bali collaboration collapsed after 3 weeks. One of the sponsors pulled out, citing ethical concerns. The rumor threads hinted at mismanagement, promised deliverables not delivered, inflated engagement numbers, standard influencer drama, but enough to raise eyebrows. I didn't start the rumor. I didn't have to. I just nudged it. An anonymous message to a journalist at a lifestyle blog. You might want to verify the guest attendance numbers for the Lane retreat. That was all. 10 words. Within days, the blog ran a piece questioning the legitimacy of the event. Other outlets picked it up. The internet loves a fallen star. It's the only sport where the crowd gets to play referee. Brooke went silent again. I imagined her pacing in some rented villa, refreshing her phone every 30 seconds, drafting apologies that sounded like press releases. Tyler Grant would be at her side, assuring her that we can spin this. Spin it. Always spin. Meanwhile, I kept my head down at work, pretending to be the quiet, expatriate architect who just wanted to restore old buildings. Elliot would glance at me over his glasses and mutter, "You've got the look of a man building something dangerous." "Only on paper," I said. He didn't believe me, but he didn't ask. By midsummer, Brooke had resurfaced yet again, this time rebranding as an advocate for digital honesty. The audacity almost impressed me. Her first podcast episode opened with, "We all make mistakes, but what defines us is how we rebuild." I poured myself a drink halfway through and muttered, "Then let's test that theory." Revenge isn't chaos. It's geometry. Every action has symmetry. She'd built her fame on carefully edited transparency, so I decided to give her the real thing. It started small. A comment here, a subtle correction there, anonymous accounts posting archived screenshots of her contradictions. Nothing cruel, just factual. "Didn't she say last year she was vegan?" one post asked, attaching a recent photo of her eating seafood. Another pointed out that her authentic apartment tour looked suspiciously like a rental listing in West Hollywood. Facts spread faster than fiction when the audience is hungry for truth. Her credibility began to erode, slowly, quietly, like rust under paint. I didn't celebrate. I just watched. Observing decay has its own serenity. One evening, while walking back from the office, I stopped at a riverside cafe. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that sticks to your clothes. A street musician played a slow tune on a violin, the notes bending like warm metal. I sat there, watching boats drift under the bridge, and thought about blueprints. Every design needs stress tests, forces applied at precise angles to reveal weaknesses. People were no different. Brooke was built for applause, not resistance. All I had to do was keep applying pressure until the noise stopped. Still, part of me wondered how far was too far. There's a point where revenge stops being justice and starts being architecture for its own sake. Beautiful, pointless, consuming. Elliot once told me that every architect secretly wants to build a cathedral, even if they pretend otherwise. Maybe revenge was mine. Weeks blurred together. I worked during the day, plotted in the evenings, slept when the city allowed it. Lisbon's heat bled into September, turning every street into a reflection. My apartment smelled perpetually of coffee and graphite. One morning, Elliot walked into the office holding a newspaper. "You'll like this," he said, tossing it onto my desk. The headline, "Influencer Partnership Crumbles Amid Authenticity Scandal." There she was again. Brooke Lane, front page, sunglasses too large for her face, caught mid-stride outside some event she hadn't been invited to finish. "Friend of yours?" Elliot asked, half joking. "Something like that." He grunted. "Looks like she's learning the hard way that public image isn't reinforced concrete." I stared at the photo. She looked thinner, her smile strained, like someone rehearsing happiness on an empty stage. Something in me should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt analytical. The structure was failing faster than expected. Maybe too fast. That evening, I sat by the river again, sketchbook open, tracing lines that weren't buildings anymore. Plans, scenarios, contingencies. There's a particular peace in precision. Every measurement removes uncertainty. Every detail brings you closer to inevitability. I started mapping the next stage. The public collapse was good, but incomplete. I wanted personal impact, the kind that couldn't be fixed with apologies or PR statements. Tyler Grant was the key. He'd built his own reputation on controlling narratives, selling redemption arcs to people who didn't deserve them. If Brooke was the facade, he was the scaffolding. Remove the scaffolding, and the whole facade falls apart. I found his company's website. It was sleek, predictable. Photos of polished offices, glowing testimonials, vague mission statements about curating reputation. I clicked through to the contact page. Generic email, phone number, social links. Too clean. But down at the bottom, almost hidden, was a tag, client portal, restricted access. I smiled. Every architect knows doors are built to be opened. That night, as rain tapped the window, I poured another drink and stared at the login screen. I wasn't a hacker, but I didn't need to be. I just needed patience and an understanding of human behavior. I tried the obvious combinations. First, his company name. Then, his initials plus the year. Nothing. On the third attempt, I entered the name of his firm's motto, Rebuild Forward. Access denied. The screen blinked once before displaying a tip. Forgot your password? A reset link has been sent to your registered email. I laughed softly. Well played. I closed the laptop. No need to rush. The internet leaves breadcrumbs. Eventually, I'd find another way in. For now, I had enough. Brooke's empire was wobbling, and Tyler's scaffolding creaked under its own weight. The next move would come soon enough. I turned off the lights, the apartment humming with the soft sound of rain. Somewhere across the ocean, Brooke was probably drafting another healing post. Let her. Healing, after all, requires breaking first. I've learned that revenge doesn't arrive with a bang. It seeps in like humidity, slow, invisible, everywhere. By the time you notice, the walls are already warping. After a month of quiet observation, I knew Brooke's patterns better than she did. She thrived on rhythm, post, tease, vanish, return reborn. Every reinvention required an audience and a stage, so the only way to reach her was to tamper with the lights and sound. The festival in Porto gave me the perfect opportunity. I heard about it through Elliot. His firm had been invited to display a restoration project, and he insisted I join. It'll do you good to see how people ruin things and pretend it's art, he said. I pretended to think about it for a day, then agreed. The timing was poetic. Brooke and Tyler were scheduled to appear as guests for a brand collaboration on sustainability and design. I almost laughed when I saw the press release. She'd always loved borrowing the language of authenticity. The weeks leading up to it, I worked like a man possessed. Not to build, but to erase myself. I scrubbed my name from old directories, deleted files, replaced my email domain. I became just another foreign architect drifting between projects. Nobody would connect the man restoring a theater ceiling to the ghost groom of viral fame. Most nights, I sat in my apartment sketching blueprints of the festival layout from photos online, angles of the stage, location of sponsor booths, sightlines of the main projection screens. It felt oddly professional, like planning a renovation that happened to involve human egos instead of buildings. Elliot watched me one evening as I pored over the sketches. "You're taking this exhibition seriously," he said. "I just like things stable," I answered without looking up. He smirked. "That's the lie architects tell before earthquakes." He wasn't wrong. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to tilt her world enough for the cracks to show in public light. My first test came 2 weeks before the event. Tyler Grant had posted a behind-the-scenes photo from his agency's office. Rows of computers, mood boards, his motivational slogan, "Rebuild Forward," splashed across the wall like a sermon. In the background sat a monitor reflecting an open folder titled Porto Presentation. The photo had over 5,000 likes before breakfast. Tyler's vanity was my favorite design flaw. That folder name gave me a foothold. Every company site hides traces of its own pride: public-facing links, mislabeled files, unsecured assets. A few late nights and a half-remembered college course on data management led me to the agency's shared presentation server. It wasn't hacking. It was simple human laziness wrapped in a password like Rebuild 2020. Inside, I found their entire slideshow for the festival. Brooke on the cover, smiling against a background of reclaimed wood textures. Titles about transparency in the digital age. Pages of quotes about honesty, integrity, trust. The irony burned so bright it could have powered the city grid. I didn't change a thing. Not yet. Instead, I copied the files, added one of my own. A blank slide at the end, identical in format, containing only her group chat message in clean typography. "Relax. I'll sneak off with my ex before the honeymoon." No watermark, no clue. Just her words, centered, minimal. Then I waited. Waiting is the hardest part of design. You do everything right, then step back and pray gravity behaves. The morning of the festival arrived warm and clear, the kind of day travel bloggers love to caption with poetic nonsense. The plaza outside the convention center buzzed with tourists, vendors, and professionals who all pretended not to care about being seen. Our restoration booth sat near the back, safe distance from the main stage, perfect vantage point. Elliot handled visitors while I watched the setup crew wheel in the sponsor screens. When I spotted the familiar logo of Grant Media, my pulse slowed instead of racing. Brooke appeared mid-afternoon, dressed in linen and charm. Cameras turned like sunflowers tracking light. Tyler followed, exuding the confidence of a man who still believed he controlled the narrative. From where I stood, they looked smaller than their photos, scaled-down versions of themselves. Fame flattens people. In person, they never measure up to their pixels. Brooke laughed easily during interviews, tossing her hair the way she used to when she wanted to disarm me. For a fleeting second, I felt that old tug, the part of me that once believed her smiles were spontaneous. Then I remembered the message. The event's sound technician left his station around 5, heading for a smoke break. I walked over, casual, hands in pockets. The USB drive felt light as chalk between my fingers. One quick swap into the back port of the media laptop, and the deed was done. No alarms, no cinematic music, just a man adjusting settings while another disappeared into the crowd. I rejoined Elliot, who was arguing with a supplier about light fixtures. "They're using the wrong bolts," he said. "That's how ceilings collapse." I smiled faintly. Noted. The evening showcase began at sunset. The main stage glowed under amber lights, the crowd thick and humming. I stood near the railing, halfway between participant and spectator. Brooke took the microphone first. Her voice carried smoothly, trained from years of scripted sincerity. "We rebuild through honesty," she said. "When we own our past, we shape our future." Every syllable was a brick in a wall she thought could hold. Halfway through the segment, the projector glitched, just a flicker, barely noticeable. The audience murmured, then settled. Tyler continued talking, unaware. Then the final slide appeared. White background, black text, her message. "Relax, I'll sneak off with my ex before the honeymoon." Gasps rippled through the square. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Others lifted their phones, recording. The silence that followed was the kind that vibrates. Brooke froze. Tyler turned toward the screen, confusion hardening into horror. For a second, I almost pitied him. He hadn't written the line, but he was now part of its architecture. Security scrambled to cut the feed. Too late. Screenshots had already multiplied. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to unsee. I stepped away before anyone could trace anything. Elliot caught my expression as I passed. "What happened?" he asked. "Design flaw," I said. He frowned but didn't press. I walked until the sound of the crowd faded into the hum of evening traffic. The river smelled faintly of iron and rain. I stopped on a bridge and looked down at the water catching the last of the sunlight. For the first time in months, my hands stopped trembling, not from triumph, but from the precision of completion. The next morning, every news feed carried the story. Influencers' live talk interrupted by leaked message. Authenticity presentation ends in chaos. Her sponsors released statements about unforeseen technical difficulties. Tyler posted a video insisting it was a malicious edit. The public, as always, believed what entertained them most. By afternoon, commentators had labeled it poetic justice. Someone even called it the greatest accidental performance art of the year. I didn't save any of the articles. They weren't the point. The point was the symmetry. Truth displayed exactly where lies used to live. That evening, Elliot found me in the office, still drafting. "You missed the after party," he said dryly. "I wasn't invited." He leaned on the doorway, watching me. "You've got the calm of a man who just buried something." I glanced up. Maybe I did. He studied me for a beat, then shrugged. "Just make sure it doesn't resurface." When he left, I stared at the blank sheet before me. My pencil hovered but didn't move. Part of me expected exhilaration, but what settled instead was clarity, an architect's satisfaction at seeing geometry behave. I hadn't raised my voice, broken a law, or touched anyone. I'd simply shown the truth in the same format she used to sell illusions. But architecture doesn't end with structure. It demands maintenance. A few days later, I saw the footage replayed on talk shows. Some hosts treated it as comedy, others as cautionary tale. Brooke released a statement claiming technical tampering. Tyler stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes calculating. Their PR empire went into overdrive. I could almost hear the gears grinding. That's when I realized this wasn't the end of a project. It was phase 1. They'd built their entire life on curation. One public crack wouldn't topple them. If I wanted permanence, I'd have to work deeper, find the weak beams and loosen them one by one. Revenge is a slow renovation. You don't demolish. You remove load-bearing walls carefully until the structure collapses under its own vanity. Still, a small part of me felt something close to relief. The message that had haunted me for months now belonged to the world. Every time someone replayed that clip, a little less of its power remained inside me. I kept working during the day, pretending normalcy. Elliot noticed the difference. "You're lighter," he said, "like someone who finally finished a design." "Maybe I'm between projects." He nodded. "Then rest before you start another one. Men who rebuild too quickly end up trapped inside their own scaffolding." Sound advice. Too bad I wasn't listening. A week later, Brooke vanished from social media. Tyler released a statement about her needing time for reflection. I could imagine the chaos behind those words, the crisis meetings, the legal threats, the late-night phone calls. I pictured her pacing in some glass-walled apartment, rehearsing apologies that would never sound real. At night, I'd pour myself a drink and study the news feeds until her name faded lower on the trending lists. Each drop was another measurement taken, another load reduced. I wasn't celebrating. I was calculating. One evening, I walked along the docks, the air sharp with salt. Boats bobbed like punctuation marks in a long, unfinished sentence. The sea has a way of reminding you that balance is just organized motion. It looks still only because it never stops moving. That was my lesson too. If I stopped, the quiet might catch up. So I kept moving. I started gathering small details, company filings, sponsorship contracts, event schedules. Tyler's firm had several new projects lined up, each dependent on reputation. I didn't need to attack them. I just needed to make sure the clients saw the cracks first. It wasn't difficult. People want to believe they're discovering secrets themselves. All I had to do was leave breadcrumbs. Within 3 weeks, another article appeared. Grant Media loses 2 major clients after festival incident. No one traced it to me. They never would. My hands were clean. I'd only shifted the balance slightly, the way a restorer tilts a stone so gravity finishes the work. Elliot read the article over lunch. "That's the couple from the conference, isn't it?" "Yeah." He looked at me, curious. "You ever wonder why people like that fall apart so quickly?" "Because they build with mirrors instead of bricks." He laughed softly. "You talk like a man who's seen both." I smiled without answering. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker against the river. The reflection looked like a blueprint turned upside down. Phase 1 complete. The structure had shifted. The weight was redistributing exactly as planned. And somewhere out there, Brooke Lane and Tyler Grant were still trying to stand upright inside a house whose foundation I'd already unbolted. The next phase would require precision, not noise. Revenge, after all, isn't a demolition. It's an art restoration, scraping away the paint until the truth underneath is too visible to ignore. I closed the curtains, set the glass down, and whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how strong your framing really is." Revenge has a rhythm. Once it starts, it hums under everything you do. Coffee brewing, footsteps on tile, the turn of a key in a lock. Even silence begins to sound like timing. Weeks passed after the Porto incident, and the noise around Brooke's scandal began to fade. That's the danger of modern humiliation. It burns hot, then cools fast. People move on to the next headline as if redemption is a loading bar. But I hadn't moved on. I was just shifting tempo. Her public image was bruised but breathing. She'd lost sponsors, sure, but she still had followers, people who wanted her to rise above. The same crowd that once adored her was now invested in her comeback. She'd post a photo with a caption about growth and get thousands of sympathy comments. It made my teeth hurt. Tyler, though, wasn't smiling. His firm had lost 2 big contracts, and the industry press had started hinting that his ethics crisis wasn't isolated. I'd seen his type before, men who mistake charm for intelligence, the kind who never look down until the ground is gone. He was my next measurement. I began with his patterns. Every Thursday, he held meetings at a downtown co-working loft, slick industrial space, concrete walls, recycled wood furniture, predictable slogans about vision. The building directory listed his company on the 3rd floor. Easy to find. Too easy. I told myself I was just observing, collecting reference photos for a potential restoration project, but every architect knows when he's lying to himself. I wanted to stand in Tyler Grant's space and see how solid it really was. The receptionist didn't even look up when I walked in, just waved me toward the elevator, assuming I belonged. The 3rd floor hallway smelled of eucalyptus and ambition. A glass wall framed the office inside, all polished surfaces and plants too symmetrical to be real. Tyler stood at the far end, laughing with 2 assistants. His suit fit like a tailored apology. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? To him, I was background, just another face in the blur of cities and clients. That invisibility felt almost holy. I studied the layout. The entrance desk facing away from the elevator, a side corridor leading toward the parking deck. In architectural terms, it was insecure by design, too open, too trusting. A place that assumed admiration, not intrusion. Back outside, I leaned against my rental car and drew a quick sketch of the floor plan in my notebook. Old habits. Every act of control begins with mapping. For the next week, I watched the building from the cafe across the street. Tyler's routine was mechanical. Arrive around 9, leave at 7, always carrying the same brown leather briefcase. He'd park his black SUV in the lower garage, third slot from the ramp. Precision makes people predictable. I didn't want to hurt him. That would have been crude and easy to trace. What I wanted was to remind him that control was an illusion. The smallest disruption can make a man doubt his own stability. So one evening, when the lot was empty except for a few maintenance trucks, I slipped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of engine oil. Tyler's SUV sat where it always did. Clean, arrogant, expensive. I crouched beside it, gloved hands steady, and slid the envelope under his windshield wiper. Inside the envelope, a printout of that same line from the group chat. Relax. I'll sneak off with my ex before the honeymoon. No signature, no note, just words, familiar ones. Next to it, I left a photograph, one I'd taken earlier that week from across the street, showing him laughing at the cafe with Brooke. The image was perfectly harmless, but paired with the message, it whispered something different. Someone is watching. Then I walked away. No alarms, no confrontation, just geometry in motion. The next morning, I returned to the cafe at my usual hour. Tyler arrived late, moving faster than usual, scanning the parking lot before locking his car. He looked over his shoulder twice as he walked inside. The rhythm had changed, a small tremor in the frame. That was step 1, introduce uncertainty. Step 2 was pressure. Brooke's online silence had stretched into a month, broken only by cryptic stories about learning to trust again. When she finally posted a new video, shot in soft morning light, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, I watched it 3 times. It wasn't her apology that interested me. It was the location. The decor gave it away. White brick walls, blue-gray curtains, a glass table with a reflection of a waterfront skyline. I recognized it immediately from a magazine feature on Tyler's apartment. She'd moved in with him. Of course she had. 2 brands consolidating for mutual survival. That made logistics easier. 1 location, 2 targets, shared weakness. The building's security was modern, but lazy. Residents used digital entry codes, easily guessed patterns, the same handful of numbers repeated in different combinations. People think codes keep them safe when, really, they just organize their fear. I didn't break in. I didn't have to. The lobby concierge was distracted by a delivery mix-up one afternoon when I walked past, carrying a rolled blueprint tube under my arm. The tube had always been my favorite form of camouflage. People assume you belong to whatever space you're walking through. I reached the elevator without a word. On the 32nd floor, the hallway stretched silent and plush. I didn't go to their door. I only wanted the view, the sightline, the exits, the elevator timing. Everything looked predictable. Too easy. Back home, I replayed the mental map and felt the hum beneath it. Every design reaches a point where intention hardens into inevitability. This was that point. Still, I forced patience. Real revenge doesn't shout, it composes. I began setting the stage for Act 2 of their unraveling. This time, no screens. Something tactile. Something that would stain the edges of their perfect lives just enough to make them flinch at every reflection. Through a public registry, I found the property management company handling their lease. Using a new alias, I emailed them an inquiry about potential safety violations in one of their penthouse units. No names, just details that matched Tyler's apartment. Outdated smoke detectors, uninspected wiring, a suspicious smell near the balcony doors. Bureaucracy does the rest. 3 days later, an inspection team visited the building. Brooke posted a frustrated story that evening. When your home turns into a construction zone because of random checks. She tried to sound amused, but her tone cracked halfway through. I poured myself coffee and smiled. Systems collapse fastest when they meet other systems. Paperwork, procedure, policy. The human element just fills in the noise. Still, part of me knew these small acts weren't enough. They were warm-ups, sketches before the real build. The Porto incident had humiliated her publicly. This phase would isolate them privately, cut the connective tissue of trust between them. Every partnership, romantic or professional, depends on the illusion of safety. Remove that, and people eat each other. Tyler's paranoia was the first fracture. 2 weeks after the envelope, he filed a police report about harassment. The document, leaked online, mentioned an anonymous threat referencing a private message. The detail about the note's content was redacted, but it didn't matter. Every journalist connected the dots. The gossip sites exploded again. Brooke's old scandal resurfaced like mold. Suddenly, she wasn't the victim healing in peace. She was the chaos returning. Tyler's company issued a statement distancing themselves from unverified incidents. The same man who'd stood behind her on camera now looked the other way. That was geometry again. Remove one beam, watch the others adjust to carry the weight. Elliot noticed I'd been working late. "Whatever you're designing," he said one night, "you're smiling too much for a man dealing with load calculations." I looked up from my sketch. "Maybe I like seeing lines align." He raised an eyebrow. "Just remember, alignment and obsession look the same on paper." He wasn't wrong, but I didn't care. Some structures deserve obsession. The following Friday, a friend from Lisbon's Architecture Guild mentioned a client in need of consultation for a hotel renovation. The client's name, Grant Media Portugal, Tyler's local branch. I nearly laughed at the symmetry. I met their operations head, a sharp woman named Sophia, at a neutral cafe. She was tired, overworked, polite. "Mr. Grant is expanding aggressively," she said, "but we've had some internal miscommunications." I nodded, pretending concern. Happens when leadership tries to control too many narratives. She smiled faintly, not realizing I'd just summarized her boss's downfall. Over the next week, I fed her subtle truths, minor inconsistencies about Tyler's reputation, whispers about lost contracts, screenshots of online speculation. Nothing fabricated, just collected and curated. Information, like architecture, only needs arrangement to become art. By the end of the month, she'd halted the expansion plan, citing uncertainty. Another load removed. The frame trembled. Meanwhile, Brooke resurfaced online again, this time sounding defensive. "Don't let people weaponize your past," she said, in a post that barely reached half her old engagement. The once adoring audience had grown weary. Redemption arcs, it seemed, had an expiration date. That evening, I walked along the harbor. The water was restless, tapping against the piers like impatient fingers. I thought about how every blueprint begins as chaos, a scatter of lines that only later make sense. Maybe that was me. Chaos pretending to be structure. When I returned home, an email waited in my inbox. No subject line. Just one sentence. "You think you're invisible, Adam. No signature, no traceable address." The words landed like a faint echo, not fear exactly, but recognition. Someone had finally looked up. I stared at the screen, then smiled. It could have been anyone. Brooke, Tyler, some fan digging too deep. But the timing was perfect. The message didn't break the rhythm. It confirmed it. When people start searching for ghosts, you know they're already haunted. The next morning, I arrived at work early. Elliot was sketching in silence, the smell of graphite and coffee mixing in the air. "You ever notice," he said without looking up, "that buildings don't fall from one mistake? It's always a series of small, invisible shifts." I nodded. "Yeah, until one day the floor feels different under your feet." He studied me for a moment. "And you think that's justice?" "Maybe it's gravity." That night, I walked the narrow streets of Alfama, the city humming softly around me. Somewhere, someone was playing an old guitar, a slow tune about distance. The music threaded through the air like memory. I thought about Brooke, about her smile, her rehearsed laugh, her belief that truth was optional as long as the lighting was good. I thought about Tyler, polishing his brand while the walls creaked. I wasn't angry anymore. I was deliberate. The final piece wasn't about exposure. It was about control. Every system has a reset point, the moment you can either restore or collapse it completely. For them, that point was approaching. All I had to do was decide how much weight to remove. I reached my apartment door, unlocked it, and paused before stepping inside. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, every sound in rhythm. The city outside exhaled. Tomorrow, I'd start phase 3. But tonight, I allowed myself a small, private truth. Revenge isn't chaos. It's architecture, drawn to scale. And I'd just finished the foundation. Every design reaches a point where you have to test the load. You've drawn the lines, calculated the angles, measured twice. Then there's nothing left but to see if it holds. That was phase 3. Not destruction, confirmation. Brooke and Tyler's world had begun to wobble on its own. I didn't need to hammer the walls. I just had to lean in the right places. Tyler's company was shrinking. Sponsors evaporated. Staff whispered. He'd started arriving late to meetings, eyes dark, phone glued to his hand. Brooke wasn't helping. The more desperate she grew for relevance, the more she posted. Each caption sounded like a plea in disguise. Sometimes strength is staying when everything tells you to leave. Her followers didn't buy it. They wanted either triumph or tragedy, and she was serving lukewarm misery. People could forgive mistakes. What they couldn't forgive was boredom. Meanwhile, I'd found a rhythm again. Work, observe, nudge, repeat. Elliot, ever perceptive, had started studying me between drafts. "You look like a man rehearsing for something," he said one morning, setting down his coffee. "Maybe I am." He smirked. "Just make sure you like the part." I did. Maybe too much. I spent my evenings charting Brooke and Tyler's digital footprints, flight patterns, appearances, sponsored posts. A single post tagged them in Zurich. A week later, another from London. Then silence. When silence comes from people who can't stop talking, it's worth listening to. I reached out, not directly, never that, but through a chain of proxies. An acquaintance in the travel industry owed me a favor. "I need confirmation on a reservation," I said casually. "Under the name Lane, maybe Grant." He found it in seconds. They were staying at the Parkworth Hotel, Suite 906. The irony was rich. I'd designed the remodel for that very hotel 3 years earlier, before the engagement. I knew every hallway, every maintenance shaft, every blind spot in its surveillance grid. The world has a strange way of looping back when you're patient enough. I booked a flight, not because I needed to see them, not yet, but because distance dulls precision. To stay in control, you need proximity. When I arrived in London, the city greeted me with its usual moodiness. Rain against glass, traffic humming like static. The hotel lobby looked just as I remembered. Marble, soft lighting, that faint smell of citrus pumped through the vents to suggest wealth. They were already there. Brooke, wearing sunglasses indoors. Tyler, pretending not to notice the stairs. They looked tired, both of them, like two people sharing the same oxygen but different realities. I didn't approach. I didn't even linger. I sat at the bar with a sketchbook open, pretending to draw the lobby's ceiling arch. Every now and then, I glanced at the mirrored column across the room, the perfect surveillance surface. They argued in whispers near the elevator. She gestured sharply. He rubbed his forehead, the international sign of defeat. I caught fragments, words like trust and timing and why now. The tone said everything. Later that evening, I followed from a distance as they exited the building. Brooke moved fast, heels striking the pavement like punctuation. Tyler followed, trying to talk. She didn't turn around. I shadowed them through the drizzle until she reached a side street, waved down a cab, and vanished. Tyler stood there alone for a few seconds, then kicked at something invisible before walking off in the other direction. The separation was real. Phase 3 had begun. Back in my room, I unrolled the hotel's maintenance blueprint on the desk. I'd requested it under the guise of a professional courtesy from an old contact. The elevator shafts ran parallel to the guest suites, a detail only a designer or ghost would appreciate. Suite 906 had 2 entrances, the main door and a service panel disguised behind a decorative wall section near the minibar, a feature I'd personally argued for during the redesign, insisting on aesthetic continuity. Nobody ever asked what continuity meant to me. I wasn't planning to enter, just knowing how was enough to calm the hum in my chest. Control is sometimes about proximity to chaos, not immersion in it. Still, I left a small envelope with the concierge the next morning, addressed to Mr. Grant. Inside, a single photograph of Brooke from years ago, smiling in her wedding dress fitting, the caption written in my handwriting, "Promises look best under good lighting." No name, no accusation, just placement. By evening, the hotel felt different. You can sense tension the way you sense weather, subtle shifts in air pressure, a sharpness in people's movement. Brooke stormed through the lobby, phone pressed to her ear. Tyler appeared minutes later, expression tight, scanning the room like someone expecting ghosts. I watched from the bar again, sipping a drink I didn't taste. He caught his reflection in the same mirrored column I'd used earlier. For a split second, his eyes locked with mine. Or maybe with the idea of me. Recognition flickered, then doubt. I smiled faintly and looked back at my sketchbook. The moment passed. They didn't stay long after that. By morning, their suite was empty. The concierge mentioned they'd checked out abruptly during the night. "Argument," she said, lowering her voice. "Happens more than you think." I thanked her and left a generous tip. Back in Lisbon, the city felt lighter. I walked the waterfront that evening, the air thick with sea salt and tourists. Every step felt measured. The plan was working, but it wasn't the result that interested me. It was the process, the precision. Revenge wasn't rage anymore. It was craft. The internet confirmed what I already knew. Brooke and Tyler had unfollowed each other on every platform. Her next post came days later, a photo of an airplane window captioned, "Sometimes you have to leave before the door closes." Tyler, meanwhile, gave an interview to a minor outlet about toxic partnerships. The irony was almost exhausting. People speculated. Some thought she'd cheated again. Others assumed he'd betrayed her professionally. Nobody knew, and that was the beauty. Confusion was my new material. Elliot noticed my good mood. "You're smiling like a man who found symmetry," he said. "Just enjoying my work," I replied. He didn't ask what kind. Weeks drifted by in calm sequence. I focused on the theater restoration, on the feel of pencil against paper, on the quiet hum of Lisbon traffic at night. I almost convinced myself it was over, that the structure I'd built had completed its purpose. Then came the message, this time not anonymous, from Brooke. Subject line, "You win." No greeting. No punctuation beyond the period at the end of that single sentence. The email address was new, the tone stripped of performance. I read it 3 times. The words didn't feel triumphant. They felt surrendered, hollow. She didn't say what I'd won, or what she'd lost. Maybe she didn't know. For a brief moment, guilt tried to crawl through the cracks. I shut it out. Guilt belongs to the architects of accidents, not precision. Still, I couldn't resist replying. There was never a competition. I didn't sign my name. Her response came 2 hours later. Then why does it feel like I'm the only one still losing? I didn't answer. Some questions deserved to echo. Days passed. Then another email arrived, this one shorter. "You'll never stop, will you?" I closed my laptop and stared out the window. The river glimmered under the streetlights, calm and indifferent. "Stop?" I whispered. "That assumes motion." By the next week, she deactivated her accounts again. Tyler's firm issued a statement about leadership restructuring. I printed the article, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the back of my sketchbook like a certificate of completion. Elliot saw it one morning. "New project?" "Old one," I said. He nodded slowly. "You ever plan on publishing it?" "No, some designs aren't meant for clients." He smiled faintly. "Then at least make sure it doesn't collapse on you." That night, I walked past the theater we'd been restoring. The scaffolding shimmered under the floodlights, a skeleton of precision waiting for skin. I thought about how similar it looked to everything I'd done. Temporary supports, invisible work, silent strength. Revenge, I realized, was scaffolding too. Once the structure stands, the supports have to come down. Otherwise, you're just living inside the frame of something unfinished. But part of me wasn't ready to dismantle yet, not when the echo still sounded in my inbox, not when the lines aligned so perfectly. The last email came a month later. No words, just an attachment. A photograph. Brooke, sitting alone at a cafe I recognized in Lisbon. My city, my ground, no caption, just proof. For the first time, the hum faltered. The line between architect and creation blurred. Had she followed me, or was she just orbiting what she couldn't let go of? I stared at the photo until dawn. Somewhere a tram clattered past, the sound of normal life continuing without permission. Revenge had always been about control. But control, I realized, isn't about holding steady. It's about knowing when to stop before the balance tips. And somewhere between the sketches, the silence, and the satisfaction, I'd built something else entirely, a mirror. When I looked into it, I didn't see Brooke or Tyler anymore, just the reflection of a man who'd designed his own cage so perfectly that even freedom would look unfinished without it. Lisbon hadn't changed, but something in its air had sharpened. The city felt closer, heavier, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. I walked the same streets as always, narrow, uneven, washed in sunlight, but every corner seemed to hum with recognition. She was here. Brooke's photograph had arrived without warning, and since then, the silence had turned into static. I hadn't replied. I hadn't needed to. That picture said everything. She'd found me, or at least she wanted me to know she could. For weeks, I'd been the invisible hand guiding her world. Now she was stepping into mine. I didn't change my routine. Routine is camouflage. I still went to the bakery every morning, still walked to the office through the same market street that smelled of oranges and diesel. If she was watching, I wanted her to see predictability. Nothing disarms people like calm. Elliot noticed, of course. He always did. "You're quieter," he said one afternoon, adjusting his glasses. "And that's saying something." "Just working," I replied. He smiled, thin and knowing. Work doesn't make people look like they're waiting for weather. He wasn't wrong. I was waiting for movement, confirmation, proof that she hadn't just sent a photograph to stir the ashes. It came 2 days later. I was walking past a cafe near the river when I saw her through the window. Sitting alone, cup untouched, phone in hand. Her hair shorter now, darker, as if she thought a new color might hide the old stains. For a moment, I thought she looked older, not in years, but in weight, the kind you carry in your shoulders when pretending is no longer effortless. She glanced up, and for the briefest second our eyes met. It was instinct, not recognition, the kind of accidental lock that happens between two people sharing the same air. But something in her froze. She didn't smile. Neither did I. I walked on. That evening, I couldn't focus on my drafts. Every line I drew came out crooked. She was too close now, a variable inside the design. Control requires distance, and she'd erased it. At midnight, I left my apartment and walked down to the pier. The water was still, moonlight turning it to glass. The air tasted of salt and metal. I sat on the stone wall, listening to the faint hum of ships. You spend enough time orchestrating someone's collapse, you start to forget what to do when they walk back onto the stage. Part of me expected her to confront me, to demand explanations, to shout. But Brooke didn't do shouting. She did spectacle. And this time, her performance had no audience. The next morning, she left another message. No words again, just a photograph of a notebook on a table. My handwriting on the cover, the one I used for sketches, the same I'd left once in the office cafe weeks ago. So, she'd been there, close enough to touch what I'd touched. I stared at the image, my reflection faint in the screen. She wasn't threatening me, she was mimicking me. In her mind, this was balance, reclaiming control through imitation. That was the problem with people like Brooke. They confused access with power. I closed the laptop, locked the doors, and started recalculating. The structure had shifted. I'd built the blueprint of her downfall piece by piece, but I hadn't planned for her to adapt. Now she was inside the architecture, moving along the walls I'd drawn. Every revenge story reaches a point where it threatens to become symmetrical. Two people circling the same center, both convinced the other started the fire. I wasn't going to let it get that far. That evening, I called an old contact, a journalist named Lena who'd covered the Porto incident months ago. Sharp, discreet, fascinated by scandal. She owed me a favor. "I have something for you," I told her. "A follow-up." She hesitated. "That story's cold, Adam." "Not if you dig in the right place." "What's the right place?" "The person who made sure you had that story in the first place." A pause. Then, "You?" "I just built the frame," I said. She filled in the color. Lena understood subtext better than most. "What do you need?" "Visibility, quietly. She's here in Lisbon. Make it look like she came chasing ghosts." "Can you prove that?" "I can make it believable." Believability was the only currency that mattered. By morning, a blog post appeared. Nothing dramatic, just a small feature titled, "Disgraced Influencer Resurfaces in Lisbon Amid Past Controversy." The tone was curious, not cruel. Enough to plant seeds. Within hours, the post had spread across smaller outlets. Comments poured in, speculation, pity, the same chorus that always follows public ruin. Brooke had wanted to find me. Now the world would find her. That afternoon, I saw her again. Same cafe, same corner table. This time, her phone wouldn't stop lighting up. She kept glancing at it, jaw tightening. Then, finally, she looked out the window, right where I was standing on the opposite curb. She saw me. Really saw me. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then she stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the street, straight toward me. "Adam," she said, not loud, just enough to stop the air. "Brooke." We stood there like two people rehearsing an argument we'd already had 100 times in our heads. "I knew it was you," she said. "The emails, the posts, all of it. It had your fingerprints." "I don't leave fingerprints," I said evenly. "That's the point." Her laugh was thin, almost brittle. "You think this makes you right? That ruining me somehow evens it out?" "I didn't ruin you," I said. "You built something fragile and expected it to last. That's rich, coming from the man who vanished from his own wedding." I almost smiled. "You make it sound so dramatic." She took a step closer. "You could have just told me how angry you were. You didn't need to." "Turn your world into a mirror?" I finished. "Maybe I did. You like reflections, remember?" Her face tightened. "I came here to talk, not fight." "No," I said softly. "You came here because you wanted to see what was left of me." She looked away, eyes bright but dry. "You win, Adam. Congratulations. You got your revenge." "You said that before," I replied. "But you're still here." She didn't answer. We stood in silence, the city moving around us, cars, voices, the metallic rattle of a passing tram. It all sounded distant. Finally, she said, "You don't even know what you want anymore." "Sure I do," I said. "I want you to understand what it feels like to live in the ruins of something you thought would never fall." Her shoulders straightened, defiance flickering through the exhaustion. "Then I guess we both know how that feels." She turned and walked away, her reflection splitting across the shop windows as she passed. I didn't follow. There was no triumph in it, just symmetry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, calm, measured, almost reflective. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't about her anymore. Maybe it was about the architecture itself, the need to see if my design would stand without the illusion. In the following days, the online noise grew louder. Her reappearance in Lisbon had reignited everything she'd tried to bury. Brand partners distanced themselves again. Tyler Grant, now desperate for distraction, released a podcast episode painting himself as the true victim. It backfired immediately. Their downfall was no longer my doing. It had momentum of its own now. Systems collapse fastest when they start believing in self-destruction. Elliot noticed I was restless. "You ever finish a building," he said, "and realize you like the scaffolding more than the structure?" I didn't answer. That evening, I went back to the pier. The air was cooler now, winter creeping in, lights shimmered on the water. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint laughter from the bars uphill. I thought about Brooke's last words. We both know how that feels. Maybe revenge isn't about balance. Maybe it's about echo. You start it, and it keeps returning until the sound becomes indistinguishable from silence. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something remained unfinished. Not with her. With me. Back in my apartment, I opened my sketchbook to the last page. Empty. Waiting. I wrote one line at the top. "Every structure ends when you stop reinforcing it." Then I closed it. The next morning, I woke early, packed a small bag, and walked out without telling anyone. Not running, just moving, because movement, at least, was still mine. At the train station, I bought a ticket to anywhere south. No destination, just motion. The platform smelled of diesel and dawn. As the train pulled away, the city blurred outside the window, familiar streets dissolving into landscape. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing or being chased, just observing. The way an architect looks at a ruin, not with regret, but with understanding. The design had held, the structure stood, and somewhere back in Lisbon, Brooke Lane was still learning to live among the rubble. I leaned back in my seat, the rhythm of the track steady beneath me, and let the hum finally fade. The road out of Lisbon was half empty that morning, the sun rising behind me like a slow exhale. I didn't know where I was going, only that I wasn't staying. For the first time in a year, I didn't have a plan. No sketches, no revenge, no next step. Just asphalt and quiet. By the time I reached the northern coast, the sky had turned gray. I stopped at a roadside diner that looked older than most of the people in it. Cracked vinyl seats, faded menus, a jukebox that only played songs from before I was born. The waitress poured coffee without asking. "You look like someone who's been driving too long," she said. I smiled faintly. "I've been leaving things behind." She nodded. "That's a full-time job for most folks." The coffee was bitter, but real. I sat by the window, watching waves slam the rocks. Each crash looked final until the next one came. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think this ends with her, Adam?" No signature, just that one line. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. The old reflex came back, the urge to trace, to plan, to respond. Then I turned the phone off. I'd spent too long living in other people's versions of me. I wasn't about to start again. I drove farther north that day, taking side roads through pine forests and villages so small they didn't appear on most maps. I rented a room above a carpenter's workshop, trading rent for design help. The owner, an older man named Duarte, spoke little English, but enough to share meals and silence. Over time, the workshop became a kind of therapy. Measuring wood, cutting it precisely, fitting joints so tight they didn't need nails. It had a rhythm that calmed the parts of my mind still wired for chaos. One night, over grilled sardines and cheap wine, Duarte asked, "Why do you work so late, my friend?" I shrugged. "Because when I stop, I think too much." He grinned. "Then work faster." For weeks, that was my life. Work, eat, sleep. The simplicity felt strange, almost suspicious. It was like living inside the quiet after thunder. Until one afternoon, a delivery van pulled up to the workshop. The driver handed me a thin envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo. Brooke, standing on a pier somewhere I didn't recognize. She looked thinner, her face drawn. No makeup, no filters. Just her and the horizon. On the back, one handwritten sentence. "You win." I stared at it for a long time. Win? As if this had been a game. As if all the lies, the running, the collapse were just points on a scoreboard. That night, I went for a long walk through the woods behind the village. The air was cool, heavy with pine and salt from the distant sea. I thought about that photo, about her standing there alone. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. I didn't. The truth is, revenge doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with echoes. You spend months, years even, planning how to make someone fall, and when they finally do, you realize you've been standing in the same collapsing structure the entire time. The next morning, I burned the photo in the old stove by my desk. The edges curled, turned black, and disappeared. That day, Duarte handed me a set of blueprints for a renovation job in town. A small schoolhouse built after the war, now falling apart. He said the local council had been debating whether to tear it down or restore it. "You decide," he told me. "You have an eye for what should stay and what should go." I took the plans home. They were simple, but full of history. Thick walls, uneven floors, beams worn from decades of use. I spent hours studying them, tracing each line. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about destruction. I was thinking about preservation. The next few weeks blurred into sawdust and paint. Kids from the village would stop by, curious about the work. Their laughter filled the empty hallways as we patched walls and sanded desks. It was quietly good. Then one morning, as I was installing a window frame, Duarte came running in with a newspaper. He pointed at the front page. The headline read, "Former influencer found living reclusively after public scandal." The photo showed Brooke walking through a small coastal town, carrying groceries, no cameras in sight. The article painted her as a fallen celebrity, learning to live without validation. I read it once, folded it neatly, and handed it back. Duarte raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" "Used to," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "She looks tired." "She was always tired," I said. "Just used to hide it better." That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the half-finished classroom, the windows open to the sound of waves. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted. Not by her, not by the past. I thought about architecture again, the kind you can't draw. How revenge is demolition, but forgiveness, even partial, is rebuilding. I wasn't sure which one I was doing, maybe both. The sun dipped low, lighting the room in gold. I closed my eyes, listening to the creak of the old structure settling into itself, solid again. Outside, the tide came in, slow and steady, wiping the shore clean. By late autumn, the mornings had turned cold enough that I could see my breath over the drafting table. The old schoolhouse smelled of fresh timber and chalk dust, a mix of past and renewal. Every nail, every board we set in place felt like sealing something old behind me. Duarte said I worked like a man who owed a debt to the world. Maybe he was right. I didn't tell him what I'd been paying off. Word spread that the renovation was ahead of schedule, and soon the town council came by to inspect. A woman named Clara led the group, practical, sharp, the kind of person who measured twice before speaking once. She asked thoughtful questions, took notes, smiled politely when I answered. When they left, she lingered at the door. "You're not from here," she said. "No," I replied, "just passing through." "Well," she said, glancing at the walls, "you've given this place a future again. That's not nothing." After she left, I stood alone in the empty classroom, hearing her words echo faintly. A future again. The phrase felt foreign in my mouth. That evening, I took a long walk along the cliffs. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, and for the first time in months, my steps didn't feel heavy. The schoolhouse was nearly done, the village had started to feel familiar, and my mind had begun to quiet. Then, one night, the quiet ended. It was late, past midnight, when I heard a car stop outside the workshop. Headlights cut across the wall, steady but too bright. I went to the window, a black sedan. My stomach sank, not in fear, but in recognition. A soft knock came at the door. I opened it slowly. Brooke stood there. She looked different, smaller somehow, wrapped in a plain coat, hair pulled back, no trace of the person who'd once treated cameras like oxygen. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "Hi, Adam," she said quietly. For a second, I just stared. "You drove all this way?" I didn't know where else to go. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. I didn't stop her. She stood in the middle of the room, glancing around at the tools, the blueprints, the faint smell of sawdust. "You've been busy," she said. "I like things that stay fixed." She nodded, pulling off her gloves. "I saw the articles, everything. You finally got what you wanted." "Did I?" She hesitated. "You ended my career, Adam. My reputation. My friends won't speak to me. Tyler, he's gone for good. Then maybe you're finally surrounded by truth." Her lips tightened. "I didn't come here to fight." "Why are you here?" She exhaled, eyes glistening, not the performative kind I used to recognize, but quiet exhaustion. "I wanted to see if you hate me as much as I think you do." I looked at her for a long time, studying the lines that success had drawn and failure had deepened. "Hate's too much work," I said finally. "I'm done building around you." She swallowed, glancing down. "I deserved what happened," she said. "Maybe not all of it, but most of it. I hurt you. I hurt a lot of people. And I thought if I just kept performing, I could outshine the truth." I said nothing. The wind rattled the loose shutters. She looked around, eyes landing on the blueprint pinned to the wall, the schoolhouse renovation plan. "You're rebuilding things now," she said softly. "That's good. It's something to do with my hands." "I thought maybe," she said, hesitating, "maybe I could help. Just for a few days. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just don't know who I am anymore." For a moment, the air felt heavier. Old instincts stirred. The part of me that remembered her charm, the easy smile that once disarmed every argument. But that was another life. "You don't fix yourself by standing in the ruins," I said. She gave a small, broken smile. "You always were poetic when you were angry." "I'm not angry," I said, and realized I meant it. "I'm tired." She nodded slowly, stepping toward the door. "Then I'll go." She paused on the threshold. "You should know. I'm not running anymore. Whatever comes next, I'll face it. Alone." "Good," I said quietly. "That's the only way it ever means anything." She left without another word. I watched the car disappear down the dirt road until the headlights faded into the dark. For a long while I stood there, hands in my pockets, the sea's steady rhythm filling the silence she'd left behind. The next morning, I returned to the schoolhouse. The sun rose pale over the horizon, catching on the newly painted windows. I unlocked the door, walked through each room slowly, listening to the faint creak of the floors beneath my boots. Outside, the children were already gathering to play before class. Their laughter echoed off the walls. Clara arrived with a smile, holding 2 cups of coffee. "We open officially tomorrow," she said. "You should come to the ceremony." "I might," I said. "You should. People ought to see who rebuilt this place." After she left, I sat by the window, looking out at the children chasing each other through the yard. The world kept going, simple, indifferent, merciful. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the underdog or the architect of revenge. I just felt human again, sitting in a building that had survived collapse. The structure was sound. So was I. The opening ceremony drew half the village. Kids lined up with paper flags, their parents standing behind them, murmuring with the kind of pride that comes from seeing something rebuilt with care. The schoolhouse gleamed in the pale morning light. Whitewashed walls, new windows catching the sea's shimmer, a bell polished until it reflected the sky. I stood at the back, hands in my pockets, watching it all unfold. Duarte was up front, wiping his hands on his apron, pretending not to smile. Clara gave a short speech about renewal through community. My name came up exactly once, and that was fine by me. The applause was for the place, not the builder. That's how it should be. When the ribbon was cut and the children poured inside, I slipped away. I walked down the narrow path that led to the cliffs, where the sea met the rocks in a steady rhythm. For months, I'd been chasing stillness, and now that I'd found it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. A gust of wind carried the sound of the bell from the school. It rang clean and bright, nothing like the chaos that had filled my life not long ago. I thought about Brooke, how she'd driven off into the dark that night, how I hadn't seen her since. Maybe she'd found her own version of quiet. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my story anymore. That should have been the end. But life, like design, has its hidden corners. That evening, a knock echoed against the cottage door. I expected Duarte, maybe Clara. Instead, it was a courier holding a slim parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Delivery for Adam Miller," he said, handing it over before I could ask from whom. Inside was a single wooden frame, hand-carved, enclosing a piece of thick drawing paper. My handwriting, my own, stared back at me, the original sketch of Brooke's house, my initials in the corner. Someone had found it, cleaned it, and returned it. No note, no message, just the design. I ran a hand over the paper, tracing the pencil grooves. Every line was exact, deliberate, balanced, the blueprint for a home that had become the stage for everything that followed. I should have burned it. Instead, I pinned it on the wall above my drafting table. Not as a memory, but as a reminder. That every design, no matter how precise, can collapse when the foundation is built on illusion. That night, I sat outside, watching the horizon fade into the color of steel. The tide came in heavy, spraying mist across the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and renewal. The headlights appeared slowly, a single car, crawling along the road toward town. My pulse tightened, then steadied. It stopped near the old workshop. A figure stepped out. Even at a distance, I knew the gate. Brooke. She didn't come to the door this time. She stood at the edge of the road, looking toward the sea, then toward the schoolhouse in the distance. From where I sat, I couldn't read her expression. She raised one hand in a small, uncertain wave, then turned, got back in the car, and drove away. No words, no message, just motion. And somehow, that was better than any apology could have been. I went back inside, sat at my desk, and opened a blank sheet of paper. For a long time, I didn't draw. I just stared at the white space, hearing the echo of the sea outside, the faint laughter of children still lingering in the air. Then I picked up my pencil. The lines came slowly at first, then with purpose. Not revenge, not collapse. Something new. Small, quiet, human. A cottage design, simple and balanced, sunlight in every room. When I finished the first sketch, I looked up at the old blueprint on the wall. The contrast between them felt like a confession and a release. One was built for illusion, the other for peace. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far offshore. The storm moved closer, wind pushing through the shutters, the world shifting in gray tones. I could have gone inside, closed the windows, waited it out. Instead, I stayed at the table, pencil still in hand, tracing the last lines of the new drawing while the wind howled through the cracks. It wasn't peace, not exactly. But it was motion, the kind that meant you'd stopped standing in ruins and started walking towards something that might hold. By the time the storm reached shore, the sketch was finished. The lines were clean, balanced, whole. I set the pencil down, stood, and looked out at the horizon one last time. Lightning flashed far out at sea, lighting the sky in pale blue. Then, for the first time since that night before the wedding, I smiled. Not the smile of a man who'd won, but of one who'd finally stopped fighting. The wind slammed the door open behind me, and I let it. The storm had arrived, but the structure stood firm. And that's where the story ends. Not with collapse, not with forgiveness, but with a man standing in the place he rebuilt himself, finally certain that the foundation would hold.